Truth is often stranger than fiction, but rarely is that really the case in the bizarre make-believe world of professional wrestling. Yet when it comes to the life and career of Tony Halme, best known for his run in WWE as Ludvig Borga, that genuinely is the case. Variously a wrestler, fighter, bodyguard, bodybuilder, actor, singer, author, and politician, Halme packed a lot into his 47 years on Earth. The dizzying highs were matched by the lowest of lows, however, and Halme's professional and personal lives were dogged by controversy, substance abuse issues, and crime. These escapades made him many enemies over the years and, at one point, landed him in a psychiatric hospital as his world crumbled around him. Spurred on to become a success by the bitterness of a broken childhood, Halme's life ended in infamy and at his own hands. From sports entertainment superstardom to Hollywood to populist politics and beyond, it's an incredible tale as crazy as the wildest wrestling storyline. Tony Christian Halme was born in Helsinki, Finland on January 6, 1963. Growing up in the Lauttasaari region of his country's capital, Halme's childhood was not a happy one. His father abandoned the family when Tony was just 6 months old after claiming he was simply going out to get cigarettes, leaving him and his older brother to be raised by their single mother. She became an alcoholic with a revolving door of male partners during Halme's formative years, and he was essentially raised by his brother Ari, who was 5 years his senior. They only spoke to their father a couple of times during their lives, and Tony's impoverished childhood could best be described as unstable as the family moved around and his attempts at studying proved unsuccessful. Tony was more preoccupied with leisurely pursuits like shooting passing buses with air rifles from the window of his bedroom, or roaming around the streets and participating in civil disobedience with the gang he belonged to. Not only was he not the studious type, but Tony was also bullied at school. It was said later in life that if Halme had any sort of sympathetic side, it was to children, especially those who had been victimized. When he turned 16, Halme moved out of his mother's house and in with his uncle. It was at this point, in his late teens, that his life and outlook began to dramatically change. Halme was always an athletic child and played several sports, including football and ice hockey. As his body grew and developed, he gained an interest in weightlifting and won some bodybuilding competitions in Finland. Proving to be a jacked-up jack-of-all-trades, master of none, Halme worked various odd jobs and eventually enlisted in the Finnish military before leaving the army and working as a bouncer. Well known and feared around the city, Halme wouldn't hesitate to get physical with unruly patrons. He also channeled some of the rage from his tumultuous upbringing into boxing, a sport he would return to professionally after his full-time wrestling career had come to an end. In the mid-1980s, Halme moved to the United States in pursuit of the American dream. He had become fascinated with the country after seeing the film Taxi Driver when he was in his early teens. Reflecting on what he felt after watching Martin Scorsese's mid-70s masterpiece, Halme said, "When I saw that movie, I immediately got the feeling that something could happen there. I wanted to be in the middle of all of it, a place where the good guys always pull the bad guys in the end, even if sometimes it goes completely to hell." He wound up in Southern California and was a regular at the famous Gold's Gym in Venice Beach. Like many in the area, he was there attempting to make it in the movies. Even in that hyper-masculine environment, Halme stood out due to his imposing look and bulky frame. At over 6 feet tall and weighing north of 300 pounds, he was clearly not a man to be messed with. His weightlifting endeavors were chronicled in some of the muscle magazines at the time, but Halme had a reputation as someone who was difficult to know. There was an air of mystery around him, but anyone who spied the small SS tattoo on the back of his lower leg would have cottoned on to some of his repugnant beliefs. It was also during this time that he commenced consuming copious amounts of steroids and growth hormone, as well as other recreational drugs like ephedrine and painkillers. He paid his bills by acting as a bodyguard for musical acts such as Cheap Trick and Kiss frontman Gene Simmons, although his own spell in the spotlight would not be far away. And the road to that spotlight was paved with spandex. Halme was first discovered in the pro wrestling sense by ex-wrestler and AWA promoter Vern Gagne, who booked him on some small independent shows in 1989. The following year, Halme, wrestling as the Viking complete with helmet and fur, would work a handful of televised matches for Herb Abrams' ill-fated UWF promotion. From the off, Halme was pushed as a force, something that would become a recurring theme throughout his career. His UWF days would be over before they could really begin, because the Viking was offered greater opportunities overseas and signed with New Japan Pro Wrestling. The wrestlers of New Japan had met Halme when he was in the country with Cheap Trick and were waiting to meet the band after a concert. Halme had bragged about how he knew even more celebrities back in the States and how he was also involved in the wrestling business. The New Japan crew didn't get a good first impression of him, but they liked his look and size and believed that he could be a top gaijin for the promotion if handled correctly. Despite his relative inexperience and comparative lack of ability, New Japan gave Halme an immediate monster push, originally billing him as an undefeated champion boxer who was coming into a new sport. He would enter the arena wearing gloves and a robe, while his matches consisted mainly of pulled boxing punches. Invariably, he would win matches via KO. Securing major victories over super heavyweights like Vader, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Shinya Hashimoto, Halme was positioned as a serious threat, while behind the scenes and in the dojo he received further coaching from notable trainers Brad Renegans and Masa Saito. In the beginning, Halme almost exclusively worked only the biggest shows in major arenas and went over on just about everyone. This preferential treatment and super strong booking naturally bred some resentment within the rest of the locker room. The other wrestlers questioned the philosophy behind it all and even debated whether Halme was really the legitimate tough guy that he claimed to be. He eventually dropped the boxer gimmick and became a straight power wrestler, with New Japan claiming that he had learnt the sport. Unfortunately, his matches typically weren't very good, and to make matters worse, Halme started to carry himself like someone who knew it all and thought he really was as good as the fantasy suggested. He started having issues with some of the other, more tenured foreigners on New Japan tours, including Road Warrior Hawk and, most famously, Scott Norton. This led to a showdown between Halme and Norton, which was originally broken up by the other wrestlers. Later in the night, though, Halme returned to finish the job and allegedly sucker punched Norton, knocking him out. This enhanced Halme's credibility as a genuine street fighter and boosted his reputation in some circles, but it also spelled the beginning of the end of his time in New Japan, as he had a ton of heat with the rest of the roster, and there was a genuine fear that Norton would seek retaliation. Halme went on 21 tours of Japan between 1990 and 1993, and right up until the very end, he was still positioned as a main event star, regardless of whether he significantly improved his ring work. The former IWGP Tag Team Champion walked right through the New Japan exit to the WWE entrance. Vince McMahon brought Halme into the fold to portray a standard anti-American foreign menace heel. Rechristened Ludvig Borga, he once again got a monster push from the get-go, with vignettes and squash matches building him up for an inevitable clash with WWE's new red, white, and blue hero, Lex Luger. Borga was supposed to be a means to get the total package ready for his WrestleMania main event title win opposite Yokozuna, which ended up not happening anyway, but Borga didn't get over as strongly as hoped, even after WWE sacrificed Tatanka's lengthy winning streak by having the Helsinki Hellraiser pin him with one finger on his chest. The Luger vs. Borga feud headlined arenas, but it drew small crowds, and interest in the program was basically over the minute Lex cleanly pinned Ludwig in their traditional Survivor Series elimination match main event. Halme's WWE career came to a sudden stop just days before the 1994 Royal Rumble, when he broke his ankle while wrestling Rick Steiner at a Madison Square Garden house show. When it was clear that Borga wouldn't be back anytime soon, WWE released him. According to Jim Ross, few tears were shed at his departure, as Halme was considered a bully and an all-round bad apple who was a headache to manage. All told, the Ludvig Borga experiment lasted around 6 months and was, overall, a failure. Halme would reportedly try to get back to WWE in 1997, but to no avail. In a curious note from a 1998 profile on Halme for the Finnish City magazine, it claims his American wrestling career ended because he was charged with importing, selling, and manufacturing narcotics, charges that he labeled unfounded. The profile claims he was cleared of any wrongdoing in February of '97, but locating records to corroborate any of this information has proved futile. Though his brief WWE run would constitute the height of his fame as far as mainstream American wrestling goes, Tony Halme continued to enjoy celebrity as he pursued other eclectic endeavors. He continued to wrestle for groups like the Dying Day UWF, the Work Shoot Japanese promotion Rings, and the Catch Wrestling Association in Europe. He also dabbled in MMA, losing his lone octagon outing by submission to a debuting Randy Couture in less than a minute at the UFC's 13th pay-per-view on May 30th, 1997. Halme also popped up as an actor in some small roles, including various commercials and the films Fist of the North Star and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Amazingly, Halme turned down a role in the box office smash Titanic, mistakenly believing that James Cameron was making some sort of a documentary. In his native Finland, Halme became a regular on the country's version of American Gladiators between 1993 and 1995, performing under the name Vikinki, aka the Viking, which increased his domestic profile significantly. As well as Finnish gladiators, Halme beefed up his public persona as the decade wore on by recording music and writing a series of autobiographies, the first of which was released in 1998. The notoriety he enjoyed in his home country has cast suspicions on his exploits as a boxer, particularly when it comes to some of the fights he had on Finnish soil. For example, there are people who believed that Halme was fed tomato can opponents, the boxing equivalent of a jobber, to pad out his stats. Officially, Halme's boxing career ended with a record of 13 wins and 6 losses, with one of those losses coming in a fight for the vacant Finnish heavyweight title after Halme repeatedly headbutted his opponents. Halme would capture the title via knockout in the rematch, thus ending his opponent's 17-0 winning streak, and go on to hold the title one more time during his boxing career. Halme hung up his gloves in 2002. It was at that point he began to look seriously at a new career in politics. It was during his time in office, where he was supposedly serving the states, that he fell afoul of the law, which is not to say that he hadn't been in trouble in the past for things like public brawling or the aforementioned drug charges which were dismissed, that his unlikely spell as a fully fledged member of the Finnish parliament shone a light on some of the more unsavory aspects of his character and personal life. Recruited by the small far-right True Finns party, Halme presented himself as a regular man of the people who was unafraid to speak his mind and took a strong stance on immigration and crime, once suggesting the state send offenders to Russian prisons as a stronger deterrent. Halme's outspokenness wasn't much of a surprise, since the publication of his first 2 books had demonstrated his chauvinistic, homophobic, and racist beliefs to the world. Regrettably, these views were evidently shared by a portion of the population, and after appealing to the poorest neighborhoods in Helsinki by routinely campaigning in malls and shady pubs, Halme was voted into parliament in March of 2003, capturing 16,390 votes. Political commentators and analysts journalists argued that Halme was voted in thanks to protest votes by people who would have otherwise not turned in a ballot, but the fact is that he was democratically elected. The result shocked the political establishment. It didn't take Halme long to cause an uproar, saying the day after he was elected that if a lesbian can be elected president, then why can't I be elected to parliament, referring to then-president Tarja Halonen. After a swift backlash to his comments, he apologized, stating that he didn't mean it as an insult and truly believed that Halonen was a lesbian, despite her being married to a notable male member of Finnish society. Halme's homophobia was no secret. Indeed, the back cover for his CD single V Kinky contains a picture of the Exit Only tattoo that sat at the top of his buttocks. Ill-advised statements aside, things seemed to be on the up for Halme when it all came crashing down on the evening of July 3rd, 2003. On the night in question, Halme indulged in a heavy drink and drug session, combining vast quantities of alcohol with amphetamines. An eyewitness observed Halme then driving erratically back to his Helsinki apartment, which is where things escalated further. When Halme got home, he and his wife Katja argued until the early hours. At 7 a.m. on the morning of July 4th, residents of the building heard a gunshot coming from Halme's apartment. After the gunshot, the arguing intensified and police were called in, surrounding the apartment building. At around 10 a.m, an ambulance arrived and drove a reportedly unconscious Halme to a nearby hospital. He had not been struck with a bullet, as police confirmed that thankfully nobody was shot, but it was obvious that Halme was not in the best shape, with his state later being described as confused. While hospitalized, Halme fell into a 3-week coma that his election manager claimed caused permanent brain damage. He would never be the same again. After he was released from hospital, he had to face charges stemming from the domestic incident. When police searched Halme's home and office, they found an unlicensed military pistol and thousands of pills and vials of illegal drugs, including anabolic steroids. Halme would be charged with 6 different crimes. Those included drunk driving, amphetamine usage, illegal possession of imported drugs, and owning an unlicensed pistol. He pled not guilty to all charges, minus the firearms charge, claiming that somebody had spiked his drink and that he had unknowingly ingested the amphetamines on the night of the incident. The drunk driving charge didn't stick, but the rest did, and Halme was handed a 4-month suspended prison sentence. He was also ordered to pay a fine totaling 80 income-linked day fines, which in his case amounted to €4,480. In addition, he was given 18 months of probation. Considering the state prosecutor was demanding a 5-year jail term, it's fair to say that Halme got off lightly, with the judge taking into account several mitigating factors when making his ruling. After the ruling, Halme said that he would appeal and vowed to continue as a Member of Parliament. His legal appeals failed to overrule the sentence, but true to his word, he continued to serve as a Member of Parliament despite talk that he would be ousted from his position. The negative publicity of the televised trial did not stop him from being elected to Helsinki Council in the fall of 2004. Nonetheless, his personal life continued to unravel, with Katja being granted a divorce from him in 2005. She would later write a tell-all book documenting their tempestuous marriage, including the time Halme threatened her with an axe. In a narrow escape, Halme avoided charges relating to an assault on a man at a hamburger stand in September of 2005, with the two parties resolving the matter privately. Then, in February of 2006, Halme was arrested again, this time for drunk driving. Further to that, he was admitted to a psychiatric ward to treat his spiraling addictions. He would stay there for 3 months. Following his treatments, Halme would be charged with aggravated drunk driving and endangering traffic. In August of 2006, he was handed a suspended 80-day prison sentence, fined €1,300, and banned from driving through the month of November. Given that the case was brought about based solely on eyewitness testimony and that no breath or blood samples were taken, Halme vowed to appeal his conviction. At the end of the year, Halme, who claimed to be suffering from neurological damage due to the coma, made it known that he would not seek re-election to Parliament. He had been on sick leave for most of the year anyway. Alongside his mental state, his general health was also deteriorating, and he was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver and acute pancreatitis, a consequence of years of hard living. After leaving Parliament and resigning from the Helsinki Council, Halme was granted a disability pension, which naturally caused a stir with other members of Parliament. From there, he pretty much retired from public life, yet still popped up in tabloids who detailed his various shenanigans, like falling over in a sauna and busting his nose, then falling over again while at a gig in Spain a short time later. In October of 2009, Halme was back in trouble with the police, suspected of impaired driving along with firearms and narcotics offences. After a night out in Tampere, Halme was arrested after being chased by police. He later claimed during an interview that he had had a couple of shots and a small amount of cocaine, expressing regret at the incident. A drug test, unsurprisingly, came back positive for cocaine and amphetamines, while a search of his apartment unearthed an illegal Luger pistol and a couple hundred rounds of 9mm ammunition. His health continued to deteriorate while his charges were pending, telling an interview program shortly after this latest incident that he walked slowly, had trouble speaking coherently, and struggled remembering things due to brain damage. Undeterred, he continued to use drugs and alcohol, saying that they helped to stabilize his volatile moods. Self-medicating to such a degree rarely leads to a positive outcome, and Halme was found dead in his Helsinki apartment on January 10, 2010. An autopsy revealed that he had shot himself with an unlicensed handgun 2 days earlier on January 8th, 2 days after his 47th birthday. A troubled and polarizing individual who was viewed by many as a monster, Tony Halme led an extraordinary life that will ultimately be remembered for the harm he caused and the sad downward spiral he embarked on during his final years. He may be a mere footnote in wrestling history, but there are perhaps lessons to be learned from Tony Halme's unbelievable and tragic story.